Okay, so another video just like the last one, similar format. I really liked recording that one since it was easy to just sit down and talk about my opinions, what I know, my thoughts, and share of the lessons that I learned in a unfiltered, unedited way. So what I want to sit down and talk about today is something that I call self-programming, the ability to program yourself. So just kicking off, what is self-programming? So self-programming for me is like changing your biological software. So just like any app or any software, you can go into the code, change the code, and get a different software with different features, a software that looks different, behaves different. I believe that you can do the same thing with yourself, with your own mind, but on a biological level. So what is biological programming? So biological programming is essentially taking yourself, your mind, your entire being, reflecting on what is the negatives of my programming. It could be things as simple as being late to meetings and appointments, being a heavy procrastinator, not being able to do deep work, right? All of these things could be things that are negatives in your programming. And it's looking at those things and saying, okay, maybe it's time for me to change this. Let's change the script so that I'm no longer late. I'm actually coming early to meetings and appointments. I no longer procrastinate, but rather do things as soon as they land on my table. I'm no longer having issues with deep work. I can just sit down and cram out hours of deep work with no problem. So self-programming is looking at these things and changing them. And it's not this made up, mysterious, abstract thing. It's a real practical thing I do that has changed me in a lot of different ways. And that goes into how did I come to discover self-programming. So it wasn't like I researched anything and found this word. Self-program is just something I've labeled it as. But I essentially had a lot of problems with my programming. I had troubles with the exact things I took as examples previously. So I had troubles with deep work. I had troubles with coming in time. I had troubles with procrastination. I was trying to do regular work and knew that something was wrong with my programming. So I started with unconscious changes to myself, which then led to discovering that it's a real thing that I can control on all levels. So I've always been an athlete since I was a kid, right? Since I started walking in two legs, I played a sport. It started off with football, led into track and field, and then led into basketball, which I did my best at for the majority of my teens, so from 10 to 18. But when I quit basketball and ventured into entrepreneurship and a different type of career, more the desk job, white label career, I came from a upbringing where it was purely physical, activity, athletics, so running, lifting weights, doing all of these different things. And now I shifted completely to desk work. So sitting down like I'm doing now, cramming at work on a laptop or on a book or on a notepad. That was a huge shift that was an activity that I never had done before. Maybe I've talked about this in previous videos, but I was really bad at school. Never had the ability to sit down in school and just do work. Reading a book, writing in a notepad, doing any of the things that was expected in school. That paired with my bad sleeping habits also. But essentially me sitting down at the desk and working was not part of my programming. And I ventured into entrepreneurship, and I knew that this is something that I have to do. There's no entrepreneurship without desk work, without being able to do deep work, just like there's no athletic career without running or lifting weights or practicing the craft of your sport. So I knew something was wrong with my programming if I'm going into this. So I started doing unconscious changes to myself and my programming. And it was, as I said, unconscious. So in the beginning, it was just me sitting down and forcing myself to do the work. Luckily, I had this drive and I had this discipline to just be able to sit down every single day and just cram out hours of deep work. But it was tough. And it was like working uphill, right? It was nothing that just came to me, but it was just more of a force, right? It was just me forcing it on myself to just sit down and do this. And I knew that this was wrong. I couldn't imagine going an X amount of years, however long I wanted to do this, and just do it the same way, just forcing, just brute force all of this. So I knew that I had to change. And I think that it just happened unconsciously, me just forcing my mind to rethink how to approach deep work and how to approach not procrastinating and all of these things. And it just naturally. But as I started journaling, as I started self-reflecting and strengthening my conscious, I was able to look at the change that I did because it was very drastic. I went from having to do brute force to make myself do deep work. And I now was able to just sit down on free will every day and just cram out all of these hours without even thinking about it. So it was no longer a struggle. It was a second nature to just do it. And I knew it wasn't due to practice and it wasn't due to me just getting used to it. I had changed something in my wiring had changed. So I had taken this set of programming and changed it to something completely different. And I knew that because I felt it. It was not me getting used to things. I've gotten used to things before, and of course I know the difference. Something had clicked. A different pattern was installed in me, a different pattern of thinking. So I realized that maybe I am onto something. Maybe I'm able to control this. I'm able to control parts of myself and change how my programming works. So this is how I came to discover this ability. And then we're going to how do you do it? If you're changing programming on a software, on a SaaS product, on an app, on a website, there's this programming languages. So you have JavaScript, CSS, HTML, you have all of these different coding languages. But our body and humans, we have our own set, our own coding language. And it's all mind games. It's visual, it's emotional, and it's verbal. This is our biological coding language. And with practice, you will notice how you can do profound changes on yourself and do it within control. Just to walk you through an example here. So I, of course, started journaling very heavily. So every single evening I sat down and wrote down a reflection of my day. So I did self-reflection, and that led to a stronger consciousness. I started to build my consciousness, became more conscious of myself, started to understand how my mind works, how my negatives, my positives, my patterns that I have set up mentally. So I was able to do this on a whim. So I just naturally developed this ability to reprogram myself. I started to find the feel of how to do it. But to take an example of how you can practice this and how it works. So as I said, with programming a software, an app or a website, you have these different coding languages which you can learn. There's tutorials out there for this. With our biological self-programming, there's also a language, but it's a lot more, it requires a lot more practice to get in tune with it and feel the control of being able to do these changes on demand, essentially. So an example, to quit smoking, you visualize yourself first being disgusted with yourself smoking. So when we have thoughts, when we think something, it has to be visual for humans. There is a condition for some humans that are not able to, I believe it's either have verbal thoughts or have visual thoughts. But the majority of us, we're able to have visual thoughts and visualize everything that we think about. So the way our thoughts work is visual, emotional, and verbal. So we have this narrating voice in our head too. And when I, for example, meditate or I do any mind practices, I have to visualize whatever I'm trying to achieve. So when I'm meditating, my practice of meditation is blocking out any thoughts that comes into my head. So when I sit down for 10 minutes and meditate, my only goal, my sole goal is not to have a single thought for the entire 10-minute period. And the way I try to achieve this is by visualizing this dome that goes around and over my head. So I visualize this dome, this shield, or whatever you might want to call it. And I visualize every thought that comes into my head as a physical thing. So every time this thought tries to get into my mind and it touches this dome, it just disappears. That's the visual image that I have when I meditate and try to clear my head of thoughts. I visualize this dome, and I visualize every time a thought hits this dome, it just disappears. This works amazing for me. It's been working for a long time, and it's as simple, and it's nothing complicated about this. I'm not doing metaphors. I'm literally saying that I visualize in my head when I close my eyes a dome going around my head, and I visualize every thought as a physical thing. And as that thought tries to get into my mind, it evaporates. As soon as it touches this dome, it evaporates. So going back to our example, trying to explain in real practical terms how to do this. So you're trying to quit smoking. You visualize yourself being disgusted with yourself smoking. So that could be maybe a visual image of yourself having this body language of being disgusted of smoking. So you have to visualize a disgusting posture or a disgusting image or environment. The entire visual image has to feel disgusting and shameful. The step 2 in this is you have to conjure up an emotion of disgust and shame. So without this part being successful, this kind of practice will never work. We had step 1, which is just visualizing the scene or the environment of being disgusted of yourself smoking. But the next part is actually conjure up the feeling, getting into the feeling of feeling disgusted and shame, right? You have to feel it, you have to truly feel it and dive into that feeling. You have to feel it in your chest, you have to visualize the image in your head. You have to do these 2 things before you can move on to the next step. So number 1, you visualize the disgusting scene. Number 2, you feel the shame and disgust. You feel the actual feeling of that. Number 3, and the final step, the narrating voice in your head has to have a disgust and shame in the tone of how it speaks. So all of us have, or most of us, at least the majority, has this narrating voice in our heads. So when you think thoughts, you have this voice in your head that narrates the thought. You have to get that voice to talk in a shameful and disgusted way as it's narrating the thought that you just had. So step number 1, create this visual of you being disgusted and ashamed of yourself doing the act of smoking. Number 2, you have to dive into the feeling of shame and disgust. You have to feel it throughout the entire thought exercise. And number 3, you have to have a shameful and disgusted tone in the narrating voice that narrates this thought from beginning to end. What we're doing here is you're attaching this entire act to a real emotion. So you're attaching it to shame, to disgust. You're attaching it to emotions that you want to avoid. You do not want to feel disgusted and you do not want to feel ashamed unless you're self-destructive, and that's an entire different discussion. If you have self-destruct patterns built into you, that's a different discussion, and we can go into that another day, and I've been in that situation too. I've been self-destructive in many ways. But for now, we're just talking about how to break a bad habit. Now, it's not just enough making yourself feel negative about something. You have to replace that negative with something good. You cannot just flood yourself with negative thoughts of shame and disgust. That's very strong emotions for a human to feel without any replacement. So the next part of this entire practice, or the practical way of programming yourself, we just went through the example of how to attach yourself to a negative feeling when doing the act that you want to stop doing. The next part is you have to know, not think, and not believe. You have to know what you are and who you are. Example, I'm a person that reads books daily. That's number one. I'm a hard worker. That's who I am. I'm a hard worker. I'm a person that reads books daily. That's just who I am. And I'm a hard worker. That's me. That's my being, right? What not to say and what not to think, and the thoughts that you have to kill in your head and in your mind, the thought process that you completely have to ban from your thought process is the words, I try to read books. I can work hard. You see the difference between these two examples that I just took. So one is, I am, right? You describe your being, you describe who you are. That's just a fixed, that's a state. You're just fixed in this. You are a hardworking person. You are an avid reader of books. You're not trying to read books, right? You are a person that reads books daily. There's a difference. With one, you open up the possibility of not doing it at all. With the other one, you're already fixed yourself into being the person that does this. I am a person that reads books daily, meaning that I never skip a day. Why would I if I'm a person that reads daily? The next one is I can work hard. If you tell yourself you can work hard, that means that you also cannot work hard. So you open up yourself for abilities to do the opposite of the thing that you're trying to achieve, versus I am a hard worker. So I am a hard worker means that's just the state. The only state that I have is working hard. If I work hard. There's no, maybe I'm trying, maybe sometimes. No, it's I am working hard. I'm a hard-working person. I'm a person reading books. Not, I sometimes read books, right? If we attach this example to smoking, you're not saying, if someone offers you a cigarette, you're not saying, oh no, it's good, I'm trying to quit smoking, right? And you're not saying, oh no, I haven't smoked for, I don't know, 18 days, or however you've been sober or free from smoking. Because what you're saying is that either you're counting the days of being sober or free from smoking, and why would you count something that is not just part of you? It's not like I'm counting how many times I've taken a breath or how many times I've blinked. Rather, should you count how many days you're free from smoking or drinking or whatever the habit is that you're trying to break? And you're not saying, no, I'm trying to quit smoking. What you're implying is that the possibility to start smoking again is open, it's wide open. You're just trying, which means that it's not fixed. By saying, no, I'm not a smoker, you've closed off all possibilities to ever do this act ever again. No, I'm not a smoker, this is not what I do. Me as a person, I couldn't do this because that's not what I do, I'm not a smoker. Describing how to self-program yourself is very complex, but I try to instill it and break it down in these practical thoughts, these practical exercises. When you are trying to reprogram yourself, it requires a lot going back inside of your conscious. It requires going into yourself and really poking around on the patterns of thinking that you have. So for example, when I had issues of procrastinating, being late, having a hard time sitting down and just focusing on deep work. When I, for example, let's take being late, right? Being late to an appointment or a meeting. For me to stop doing that, it was so easy for me to just sit around and wait for the deadline or the time for the appointment to come up. And just as I'm about to head out, I already know that I'm going to be late because I'm heading out way too late. And I was too comfortable in doing that. When I decided to change this program, I already had developed this ability to program. So for me, it was just going into the practice again to change this set in my programming. So what I did was, as soon as I started to get appointments or meetings, and I knew that, oh, I have a meeting at this time today or this time tomorrow, I, long before that, started to visualize me being late to the meeting. I attached an emotion to it and I truly felt it. I truly went into the situation of feeling that emotion and seeing that scene of being late. And I had this narrator in my voice describing how shameful and awkward it would be if I was late. So I attached this feeling of shame and this feeling of destruction, how I was destroying my career, how I was destroying my reputation, thanks to being late. And I started doing this practice for every single meeting that I had. And I'm not talking about just a couple of minutes before the meeting happens. As soon as the meeting was set, I started going into these thoughts and I started to play out the scene of me being late. And I replaced it with, I'm a person that's never late. I'm never late to anything. And I started to play this. And as soon as the meeting is coming up and I played this scenario 100 of times in my mind, I've now told myself there's no chance I'm getting late to this meeting. And as soon as the deadline for me going out of the door and getting to meeting at the time, as soon as that came up, I already started to feel changes in my body. My body changed. I started to get anxious. I started to preparing, showering, getting clothed, preparing for the meeting, whatever it was, long before I had to head out through the door, because I had programmed myself to never be late and set these safeguards in place, which is emotional safeguards, thought patterns. All of these things was set up thanks to my self-programming. And since I programmed myself to being the person that never is late, I'm never late to anything, I now had set this default in my head that when a meeting comes up and I had a meeting to prepare for, it was so important for me because it's a part of my character. Again, I am not a person that's ever late to a meeting. That means that it's very important for me to keep up that self-identity or character that I set up for myself. And this is how I program myself. There has been a ton of things that I have changed. During my entire upbringing, there has been a lot of things that shaped me. I grew up, as I said in the previous video, in an environment. My parents were really hardworking people with a lot of respect. My father, my mother was people that I respected more than anyone on this planet and ever will, because of how hard they worked. But with this, of course, came the ability to be able to less develop us in our upbringing. So they didn't have time to sit down and have long talks with us about how to set up good habits or whatever. They were busy with work and everything that they had to take care of. So during the upbringing, I developed bad habits. I developed bad thought patterns. I developed bad ways of just carrying myself through life. And in this age, and as I went into my late teens and the early 20s, I'm now 23. When I went into when I was about 20, 21, that was when I started to discover all of these ways of hacking yourself, biohacking, self-programming, you name it. And that's when I started to build on these foundational things that created me as a person and changing them. So I looked at all of these bad things that was with me. Not only the procrastination, being late, the inability to do deep work at the desk. There was a ton of things that I was able to reprogram myself on. And reprogram is a powerful thing that if you get a hang of it, if you truly get a hang of self-programming, there will never be anything in your life that you will not be able to do. If your goal is to become a doctor, let's say that that's a goal that you have. To become a doctor, there's a ton of studying going into it. There's no workarounds or hacks or cheat codes. The only way to become a doctor and go into that path is sit down every single day and do granular, painful studying. So you sit down every day and go through the textbooks, go through the lectures or notes, whatever it is. If you're a person that is unable to sit down for these long periods of time, for these long time frames and do the same thing over and over again, self-programming is the only way to get into that, unless you have this otherworldly brute force that you can enforce on yourself to just do it anyways. With self-programming, you make it a lot easier. You now program yourself to be the person that can sit down and do the hard work, right? You are a person that can sit down and do hours of deep studying every single day. With self-programming, that's the only way of actually doing it efficiently. So I would be happy to do a more structured and more visual video on self-programming and how I've learned it and how I'm developing it every single day. And I've gotten to a stage where I can literally sit down and face a challenge in the moment. And in the moment as I'm facing the challenge, I'm able to reflect and realize that this is a blocker that I have in my programming, and I'm able to go into it right away and change the code. It could be the way let's say, for example, in our team meetings, in my company, we have daily team meetings. We have daily team catch-up calls, and we have daily sales catch-ups. As a leader, I don't have the ability to just go into, or I don't have the, the margin of error, or the margin to go into one of these calls and be dead in my energy levels. Go into the calls and just be demoralizing in the way I'm carrying myself, slouching shoulders, very tired when I'm talking. I have to go into these meetings with posture, and I have to go into with some level of energy and motivation in every single of these calls. Even if I'm tired, I haven't maybe slept well for whatever reason, and whatever the state of me is, I never can go into these calls with low energy and risk demotivating my teams. I had the issue where I had low energy, and I realized there was a couple of calls I went in and I said, shit, how am I going to go through this hours-long call with high energy levels and motivate the team? And I realized that insufficiency at the moment it happened, and I was able to right away go into why that was, where I got this thought pattern from, starting to play scenarios similar to the ones that I just described here in the practices, and do a lot of advanced, what I call advanced mind tricks on myself to hack this, to change the programming, to be able to say that even on low energy levels, I'm able to put up a certain amount of whatever you would call it, energy or output in the way I'm speaking or in the way I'm addressing team members. That's an example, and that's the power of being able to master self-programming. And once you master it, you will feel unstoppable. And since you're able to control yourself, just as you can control your iPhone, just like you can go into your settings on your iPhone and change the background image or change the time or change whatever you want on the iPhone, you will feel the same way with yourself. You will in some ways productize yourself, or maybe that's an ugly word, but you will be able to go into yourself and have that control. You'll have a grip over your programming and be able to change anything that you need to change in yourself. And it's bar none the most powerful thing I've learned and that I've implemented and that I'm doing on a continuous basis. So I truly hope that this wasn't too abstract and I was able to describe it well enough for anyone out there to give a shot at it and develop this skill yourself and actually get some benefits from it. Whether you're trying to run a company, or you have a career as a designer, developer, copywriter, doctor, whatever it is, want to become better at your work, more efficient, or if you have a family that you're trying to feed, whatever the situation is, and you have these blockers in you that's holding you back. I hope that what I'm trying to teach in this video was able to do some improvement or some change down the line. So I would be happy to answer comments, send me DMs or send me comments on YouTube. I love helping people just give tips and teach some of the things that I know. And of course, I'm not always right, but on this point, I'm not bullshitting, and I truly feel like I have learned something very valuable, and I try to teach that to you. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments, or we can also chat over Instagram or any platform. I would love to help you. And yeah, I will continue releasing these types of videos. And if there's anything that you want me to talk specific about, leave that comment, let me know, and I will be happy to sit down and have that talk. Thank you.